panelists for joining us. You have the mint in all your tables. If you look at today's primer, it's on IITs and how the batch of 2025 could be in a bit of bother. And that primer, of course, is written by my colleague Devina, who is there in the audience. Now, it mentions a couple of black swan events, right? And it has to do with geopolitics. The missiles dropping in West Asia. Europe has been volatile for some time. Inflationary pressures are there. It's easing, but it's still around. And there is a US elections, which could determine the tariff, how the tariff world shapes up going ahead. So all these have an impact on economies. India definitely exports market, which Vishal will talk about in a bit. Now, but before we get, so India will have all these challenges to deal with as we proceed towards a goal of being a middle income country by whatever date economists chalk. But let's go to Mr. Joshi here, who is an economist, and he has plotted India's growth journey till 2030, next 7 years. So what does it say? How fast do we have to grow to become a middle income country?
Well, we are already a middle income country in some sense, but towards the lower end of the middle income. Before I get into the numbers, I just wanted to say that India already has a track record of high growth. It's not something new to us. If you take 3 decades before the pandemic, the average rate of growth was 6.2%. Now the question is how faster you grow than that. That is the benchmark. And as you keep growing, your size increases and it becomes even harder to maintain that growth rate. So I think what we have done is we've done a growth accounting exercise which informs us that we can grow at about 6.7% per year for the next 7-8 years. And if that happens, our size increases from 3.6 trillion right now to about 7 trillion. So you, in terms of the overall size, you become the third largest economy in the world. Our current size is about $2,600 is about $3.6 trillion. Now, the other issue is, which is of importance here, is per capita income. I think we rank very high in terms of overall GDP, but which is the 5th largest economy right now. But in terms of per capita income, which is $2,600, we are 143. So there's a lot of ground to cover. So this per capita income will also rise because we have, the GDP is growing faster than the population, and we believe it will become 4,500, which is start of the upper middle income category, and the consumption tends to become more dense by that time. Now, what does it mean? I mean, or what is going to drive it broadly? So I'm not going to get into the details, but very quickly, I think we use a framework which is called the Robert Solow framework, which for growth accounting. So it splits growth into 3 drivers. One is capital, which is investments. Second is labor. So labor and capital combine together to produce output. If the same amount of labor and the same amount of capital produce more, you become more efficient. That is the total factor productivity, which is the third part. So let me just give you the broad numbers. The contribution of capital is about 53% to the 6.7% growth. Contribution of efficiency or total factor productivity is about 30%, which is higher than the previous decade. The contribution of labor remains almost stagnant at about 17%, 17-18%, which means that the returns to labor don't increase that much. The returns to capital, the efficiency benefits will be there in the system, but in a base case scenario, the labor may not benefit that much from that.
Right. Naina, if I could come to you, why don't you talk a little bit about some of the missing pieces that we need to fill when we progress towards this journey of 2047?
So it's a long list, and I think you touched on jobs and labor productivity and labor's contribution, and I think this remains a very key area. But I would just want to do a deep dive into an area I work in, but one which I believe if we cannot solve for, we are not going to see our trillions in success as we seek, and that is water and sanitation, and the contribution of water and sanitation to the health of every one of us is critical. So without a healthy population, without proper management of water, where we are already very water short, and entirely because of mismanagement of water, we are not a desert nation. We have sufficient rivers and water to take care of us. It's just the poor way in which we manage this. And sanitation in terms of hygiene and cleanliness and how that contributes to health. So I would just state that unless we can drive long-term behavior change, and there is this broken window syndrome, which is defined by economists as if there is a broken window, the neighborhood begins to drop, crime increases, you get, as exactly you get with garbage, when one person begins to chuck stuff in a corner, before you know it, it becomes a heap. How do we make this behavior change happen that we can carry forward what is required in terms of hygiene? And I think in order to get there, because these are the essential ingredients which are being planted today and are critical, public-private partnership. So what we have done at the India Sanitation Coalition is brought corporates at the request of the Ministry of Drinking Water, Sanitation, Jal Shakti together, so that model villages are created where government said we have given money down at the panchayat level, money is not getting spent the way it should. We want the corporates to come and oversee this. We don't want the corporates for their money. And this has been a highly successful lighthouse initiative is what it's called in terms of public-private partnership. So if we can drive this in terms of execution and delivery of social goods, delivery of sanitation, water management, plastic waste management, which is now underway at the rural level, I think we go very far. And then there's the role of the community. I've actually just done an article on this in Hindustan Times, in your group, on the operations and management side of it. So you build a toilet, but then it's locked because you haven't provided for how to look after it. So what is the model for operation and management? It brings jobs, you need money, but you can also make it a for-profit model for the people who run these facilities, where they, and it's not just about a government job, but can actually earn money for a profit by charging for that service. So what is that operation management model? If we don't solve for these very basic ingredients today, we are not going to be able to make that infrastructure work for the success of our people. So I think those have to be areas of focus. And then I would just say for industry, who is not a big user of water, but to achieve net zero, by net zero, as many of you know, it is that the water that I use should be the equivalent water that I give back into the water body which I draw from. And big industry is already well there. We need to help the MSME sector get there. And lastly, water and agriculture. 85% of our water goes to agriculture. Are we giving enough attention to what we grow and how we grow it? And the answer is no. So basically, if we can solve for this, I think we do create a terrific agenda for achieving the growth.
Let me go to Vishal. And you just touched on water, and I know for a fact that Vishal also has some views on that, on what we should grow, right? And this goes back to a conversation on palm oil and palm. Did you have a view on that?
So you mean on water and palm?
Yes.
Specifically? Yes. Okay. Yeah, I have a view on both. I worked in the water industry for 15 years and I'm in the palm industry right now, in a way. I think Naina makes a very fair point on water. And the last couple of points she made actually are the most significant, which is 85% of water that's used in India is in agriculture. This is very unlike the profile or pattern that you'll see in any developed country. Yeah, look at the top top 50 countries in terms of development, I'm saying, not in terms of GDP, and you'll find industry is the largest consumer of water, not agriculture. I think from that point of view, without having agricultural water efficiency looked at, whatever industry does will not cut the, will not cut it. It won't be enough. It won't move the needle enough. So there are actually three parts. There's agriculture, there's industry, and there's what we call as municipal consumption, yeah, which is the water we all use in our homes and in our offices. These are the three parts where water is essentially used. Big industry, as Diana said, is actually driving a lot of efficiency and recycling on water. That is happening. But the minute you get to the mid-scale and lower, smaller industries, I think the awareness itself is low, and the concern as well is low. Personally, my belief is water needs to be priced much higher. This is a very unpopular statement, I'm sure. Nobody out here will like listening to this. But the fact is, water is considered free in our country. So on one hand, we are water deficit. On the other hand, we have a very, very low cost of water. There's something called a world water map. If you Google it, you'll find it. Yeah? So when you go home tonight, do that. And you'll find there are red areas, orange areas, blue areas. Blue are the best, red are the worst. You'll find we are semi-red. We're not very different from the Middle East or West Asia. In spite of that, water is nearly free in our country. So if you don't need to pay for it, you'll use it and waste it. Why drive efficiency? And because the cost of water is so low, when you invest in water recycling, the ROI on those projects is like 10 years. And all of us know, if you operate with a capitalist mindset, you're not going to invest in a project that's going to have a 10-year payback. So these are all fundamental issues that need to be addressed, partly by industry and partly by the government and policymakers, I would say. Coming to palm, I'm not sure what you want to hear on palm, Gautam, but I'll just put it like this. Let's not just talk of palm alone. Let's go to the vegetable oil consumption of our country. Yeah? We all use a lot of oil in our homes. Our cooking is very oil-based. We are a net importer of vegetable oils. I'm not sure how many of you know this, but more than 50% of our oil is imported. And the vast majority of that is palm, primarily produced by Malaysia and Indonesia. This is not a great place to be in, yeah, because we spend billions and tens of billions of dollars importing vegetable oil so that we can all cook comfortably in our house. Now the government has launched a mission to become oil sufficient in the next 10, 15 years, and work is going on that, but I think much more can be done on that front. And coming to palm specifically, as Gautam mentioned, as I said, Indonesia, Malaysia produce 85% of the world's palm. Why can't India, which doesn't have a very different climate profile compared to Indonesia and Malaysia, large parts of India can take palm cultivation. I think this needs to be promoted very aggressively. Today, in total, we have less than 500,000 hectares of palm under cultivation, compared to Malaysia, which has like 30 million hectares, and compared to Indonesia, which has like 60 million hectares. So we are nowhere. And we are adding only 30, 40, 50,000 hectares a year. So which means if we want to get to even 5 million hectares, it's going to take us 15 years. That's too long. Then we'll remain an import-dependent economy for our vegetable oil needs for a long, long time. And palm oil, by the way, is not just used for personal consumption to cook food. It's also used in the oleochemical industry, which is where which I represent today. So I think a lot more needs to be done on this, and I think with government and industry working together, we could land up in a much, much better place 10 years from now. But we'll need to add 1 million hectares a year, not 50,000. That won't cut it.
The reason I brought it up is because Naina spoke about the transition to crops, different crops, diversity of crops. And I think this is one transition that has been resisted at different levels, right, from farmers itself. But Jagbir represents the alcohol-bev industry, and he also deals a lot with water. But today he's going to speak about the ease of doing business, and that's an important yardstick to measure as India progresses towards being a middle-income, high middle-income country. Jagbir?
Thanks, Gautam. While in the past few years we've seen huge reforms in terms of ease of doing business, but most of them, unfortunately, have been at the Government of India level. And alcohol as a category,
Jagbir, can you hold the mic closer?
alcohol as a category is something which is driven and regulated by the state governments. So we actually deal with about 28 states and 2 union territories. So when you make an alcohol plan, it's like dealing with Europe. So we have 28 different excise policies. We have 28 different regulations. We have 28 different mandatories to be printed on each label for each SKU that we have. For example, every bottle of alcohol in Delhi has to have the statutory warning in 4 languages. Then in some state it has to be across, but these are minor problems. The problems that we primarily face are archaic laws. We are governed by primarily 3 or 4 laws, which is the Punjab Excise Act, which was made in 1930s, the Bombay Presidency Prohibition Act, the West Bengal Act. Probably the only state to reform the Excise Act was the Delhi Excise Act, which was reformed from the Punjab Excise Act in the early 2000s. You would be surprised to know that for an alcohol company to get a price increase on its own manufacturing cost takes about 4 to 5 years of struggle. We've had instances where the government refused to give price increases on 25-year-old, 21-year-old single malts because they felt that the price will go up by 300 rupees a bottle and maybe somebody may not be able to afford it. So that's the kind of constraints we face. We see a huge potential in exporting alcohol out of India. We all are aware of the lovely Indian single malts that are making a mark for themselves globally. And I'm sure most of us who would be here in the evening would get to taste one, a brand called Godawan that we've launched as an Indian single malt. But unfortunately, while we export the product, we also export the duties. Every state for export also has a different label. So if you manufacture and send from the state of Rajasthan to UK, you'll have to have a different label. And if you manufacture in the state of Maharashtra and export to UK, you'll have to have a different label. Therefore, the urge and the request to the various state governments is like the reforms that we've seen in Government of India. I think the reforms really need to be brought about in state governments. To run a factory, we need at least 10,000 approvals per year. That's the number.
Sorry, can you repeat that number?
10,000.
Approvals per year.
Per year, yeah. So there are 10,000 times that somebody has to approve a process, every time you manufacture, a batch is there, etc., etc. So and a lot of it, for example, there are states, today in a stage where you have digital locks on trucks, etc., there are people you have to wait for a excise official to sit in a truck for your stocks to pass through a state. These were there in the 1930s, nobody bothered to change them. The good thing that the Government of India did was the BRAP, which was kind of a comparative federalism on the reforms that the state brought about. A few excise matters were brought in. I think that is one step which the government can take to increase revenues. Incidentally, the alcohol industry contributes to about 2.5 lakh crores of excise duties per year. So we are very large contributors to the state and the Government of India exchequers. We provide employment to almost directly or indirectly to almost 7 million people in the F&B industry, in the agriculture industry, and in the manufacturing industry. So, I can talk about alcohol and the ease of doing business for a very long time, but the idea is that ease of doing business is something which will really help our manufacturing sector, our service sector to grow.
Absolutely, and single malts, Indian single malts, are a classic example of Make in India. Will come to manufacturing in a bit. Dr. Sen, welcome.
Thank you.
And could you start by talking about, to sustain the 7%, 6.5–7% growth rate, right, that India needs over next 7–8 years, how easy or difficult will that be? And is it even possible to, consistently maintain 7% growth?
Gautam, I thought we were going to talk about 30 trillion, right, in 23 years.
Yes.
6.5–7% for the next 7 years isn't going to cut it. 6.5 to 7% over the next 7 years, I think is fairly easy. That's not the issue.
Right.
The real issue is that unless we start thinking about it now, we are not going to be able to maintain 7.5% for 2 decades and more, which is what you need. So I think the appropriate question is, can we do that? Next 5 to 7 years, no sweat. You're going to have ups and downs. International events are going to come in the way. But the real question is the longer term. And let me go back to something, most of us learned as undergraduates, which is there's a fairly simple relationship between investment and growth. And there's the intervening variable there is what's called the incremental capital output ratio, right? And at some point in the last decade and a half, we've stopped talking about it. We'd better start talking now. And let me give you a feel for why it is important. Take the United States. For the United States, it requires 6 additional units of capital to produce 1 additional unit of output. In India, it used to take 3.5. Right? So think of, let's say, an investment rate of 20%. That's going to generate only about 3% growth in the US. But in India, it could generate a growth of above 5%. So when we are talking about sustaining growth at 7.5%, you have to be very clear as to what is happening to this incremental capital output ratio and what can you do about it. Again, let's look at what's happening in the world. Countries, as they have developed, the incremental capital output ratio has moved up, usually from around 3.5 to somewhere closer to 6. We are at about 4.5 now. But not so long ago, we used to be at 4.1. Over 15 years, we've moved up 40 basis points on that. Right? If that trend continues, in the next 10 years, our incremental capital output ratio will be above 5, which means you're going to have to invest 37%, 38% just to have a 7% growth. And if that trend continues, which it probably will, then things are going to get worse. So we've got to be very, very clear as to what it's going to take. Either we increase our investment rates to levels that China had, which was 47, 48%, or if you say that, look, given our conditions, given our consumption needs, we can't do more than 35, 36, we'd better start focusing on using that capital efficiently. Now, what's happening, and this is becoming amply clear, because it's of fairly recent provenance, is that the capital intensity of Indian production, and this is not just manufacturing, by the way, this cuts across the board, has been going up.
Correct.
Nothing wrong with that. That's bound to happen. What is the real question you have to ask is the pace at which it happens. Not that it's going to happen, it's inevitable, you shouldn't stop it. But you can actually influence the pace. How you do it, different people have different answers, but it's something we don't even discuss. I mean, let me give you again a first-year textbook method of getting this done, right? Which is increase the interest rate. There's something called the yield curve. It's something that we used to talk about all the time. The RBI used to discuss it, and we used to discuss what the term structure of our interest rate should be. All of that has vanished from public discourse. Today we have a situation, and this is absolutely frightening to me, is we have That is the difference between a 90-day loan and a 10-year loan is 70 basis points, which is just about the same as in the United States. How we justify it, I do not know. But then we get surprised as to why companies who are being absolutely rational and sensible are becoming more and more capital intensive. And that's something we have to work on as a strategy. And if we don't do it, let me tell you, 10 years later, we'd be lucky if we can sustain 5%.
You had an opinion on a couple of factors of production, capital and labor, and how you could improve labor productivity.
Well, I think, just picking on what Dr. Sen just said, I think in terms of efficiency, I think I was talking about the solo framework where, yeah, if you with the same amount of capital and labor, you produce more, you become more efficient. So in that sense, I think I do believe over the next 7-8 years till 30-31, capital is definitely going to play a very important role. It is a dominant factor even right now. And because we are investing in infrastructure, the multiplier effects are higher, so you will going to get a bigger kick for growth. Don't be surprised that in the last 4 to 5 years, everybody who predicted India's growth, I think, has been on the downside. So growth has actually surprised on the upside. And to me, one of the reasons is, I think, the public infrastructure has added to some amount of efficiency, some amount of multiplier effects, which will slowly become visible. The second, I think, reason or the factor is efficiency. So here, I think the investment in infrastructure means that your turnaround times reduce, you can move your goods more efficiently, ports will become more efficient over time because you're investing there. In addition to that, I think what's also happened in India, which is, by the way, very unique from the rest of the world, is most countries developed their physical infrastructure first, digital came later. India actually has leapfrogged in the digital side, physical is still trying to catch up. Yeah. And digital, as I think the secretary was pointing out, has its own efficiencies. Whether it is the payment system, you can dispense credit much faster. What could take a week can be done in half a day. All those things are there. And then the interoperable and open source system also allows innovations like maybe, let's say, which are also efficiency promoting, like DigiYatra or CoWIN, or there could be several others. So I believe that the efficiency part will increase its contribution in the next 7 years over the past. I think the third element is the labor. Yeah. Now, the labor, I think, look at the structure of the economy. I think the share of agriculture has been going down. The share of non-agriculture has been rising, but the people dependent on agriculture haven't come down that much. So you need to make the population plug into the growing areas, which is the areas which are expanding. So it's really surprising that there's a skill mismatch in the system where you have an unemployable army or underemployed army of labor, let me put it that way. And on the one hand, and on the other hand, I think you have areas where people are needed and you don't have enough people. So maybe I think there are some initiatives which were announced in the budget which will, to some extent, take care of it. Now, just to close the argument, I think I just wanted to say that these three factors should not be looked in isolation. There is a lot of synergy that takes place between these. For instance, when you do a reform like GST, you get rid of the octroi points. Yep. You move faster, so your checkpoints are out. When you create better highways, your turnaround time reduces, as I said. So that is another layer of efficiency. If you fast tag, then you can move even faster. So there is a synergy that takes place between all of these. So we need to invest more, I think more in infrastructure because there's a lot of catch up to do. Digitalization can be leveraged to increase that benefit. And the reforms, I think that's what I was coming to. The reforms pay off with a lag. The GST was introduced few years back. Only now we are seeing its benefit in terms of taxes, etc. Right. So I think unless you have a pipeline, a continuous pipeline, I think then the returns to whatever you do, I think, keep reducing. So you need to keep the pedal on the reforms also high so that the growth is sustained. There is a huge opportunity for India, by the way, to move up because we are a low per capita income country. If you moment you debottleneck, you grow faster.
Right. Just hold your thought on skilling. I wanted to ask Naina that because as a former chief of FICCI, you did get a closer look at skilling programs and how we were progressing on that front. So do you think that is the critical gap India has, employability, right? Employment is not really a problem in India. Everybody is employed in some ways or the other. It's really about underemployment, and I think the critical gap is skilling. So do you see that gap? How do you see it? How can we progress towards that?
You know, this is a very complex area. So at the outset, I do think even before skills, it is about jobs and job creation. The demographic dividend, which the world seems to believe is a big advantage, implodes if we can't actually deploy that advantage of young working populations. So that goes without saying. We've had a great success story on the services side in IT, but huge gaps in areas which should have been a natural advantage for us, which I'm glad to see there's some focus on. And tourism is a classic. There are whole economies in Europe that depend on tourism. And the richness of India is well understood by those of us who know it. But in order to attack tourism, it's about infrastructure, it's about safety, security, it's about the soft aspects of India, it's about, you know, visa processes. It's actually streamlining everything that can create a job-rich tourism culture for Indians to prefer to travel in India, and also for that foreigner who hardly comes to India as part of his or her tourism experience. And that I give just as an example. Huge potential for us in the areas of healthcare giving, whether it's caregiving to the elderly, hospitals, medical treatment, etc. So we have a long way to go. And my worry is that we give so much focus to manufacturing, which for all the reasons you're hearing from Pronab and Mr. Joshi here, are really very capital intensive as we go forward. Manufacturing and its nature is getting more and more capital intensive. If we can give that same attention and more to the services side, where we are both a very big exporter and a big employment deployer, then we actually will possibly see the results we want. And I would like to see a lot more work in these really labor-intensive sectors, which can come naturally to us. And that goes straight into the skilling areas. Now, in some of the skilling areas I've worked in, the challenge often is aspiration. So you go to that average youngster today, everyone wants to do computer programs. What they're learning in computers, what they're doing, God alone knows. And with AI, maybe those very jobs are the ones that
no one is
disappear.
interested in vocational training.
Whereas what we need, I mean, we had a huge shortage of plumbers when we were out there on the Swachh Bharat mission building the toilets. But the shortage was because people didn't, the young people don't want to and don't aspire to the jobs we need. And so we have to actually create a discourse where the aspiration matches the jobs and the skilling is one where the jobs are required. And that interknitting is going to be very critical because people we have. And on the other side of it, I fear there's a very strong sense of entitlement that is beginning to come across. For every dole we give, there's some kid who sits at home believing it's much easier than getting out there. I'll work for 10 days, you know, and I don't want to work for the full 30 days because I'm not really enjoying what I'm doing. I have to travel 20 kilometers. I'd rather just work around where I am. So this aspiration, entitlement, drug abuse, how do we tackle this in a way that the young are aspirational and vocationally skilled in order to take the full advantage of what our economy provides them?
The Chief Economic Advisor did mention the same point. Let me come to Vishal, who represents the manufacturing sector. What do you think about the automation in the sector, Vishal? Is it speeding up? Because that seems to be a concern, because as capital intensity in manufacturing grows, it means that it cannot possibly mop up the labor that would probably migrate from farm to the non-farm sector in a way that it has helped China earlier.
So automation is very much catching up in every industry you can think about. Having said that, it's not like automation is going to replace people. It's actually going to make the manufacturing process more efficient. It's going to make it more data-driven. It's going to make it faster. And it's actually going to help drive productivity. To a certain extent, it will impact the manpower used in that operation or in that plant. But it's not going to, eliminate it. You're never going to see a plant with robots walking around and that's it. Nobody else doing anything out there. That's not going to happen in India for a couple of decades more at least, if not even much longer actually. So I would say every industry is focusing on that. Now, while I'm answering the automation piece, let me just address a couple of other points here as well. See, Secretary Krishnan spoke about value addition, and he spoke about getting into high-tech areas. I think that's going to be very important for us to work on if we really aspire for that 30 trillion by 2047. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. It is not going to happen only through services. I think that's aptly clear already. We've grown tremendously in the services sector in the last 30 years. Manufacturing has actually fallen behind. You also can't be dependent only on services or agriculture, because if you're going to import everything else from other countries, you're going to become strategically dependent on the rest of the world to survive. You can't do that. You need to have your own products, you need to have your own technologies, you need to have your own innovation if you want to be a strong country and if you want to prosper long term. So manufacturing is indispensable. We'll have to become really, really good at that. Our share of global trade today sits at 1.67%. That is abysmally low. 400 years back, India's share was 20% of the global trade. Today it's 1.67. We rank way down. If we want to be a 30 trillion economy, we also can't depend only on domestic sales in India. We'll have to sell internationally. We'll have to look at the world as our market. And we won't be able to do that unless we become much better at technology, and more importantly, we become much better at innovation, which again Secretary Krishnan spoke about. So I would actually say, while we are talking of automation, Gautam, I think innovation is actually what we should be thinking about from a manufacturing sector perspective. Our R&D spend in India as a percentage of GDP, anyone can guess out here? Anyone knows?
Yes.
What's the R&D spend of this country, of our country, that we love so much as a percentage of GDP? Anyone wants to guess? Sorry? 0.7%. Spot on. 0.7%. 0.666 to be exact. That's where it is. You know where South Korea is? It's 5.6. So 5.6, 0.66. We are 1/9 of South Korea. That won't fly. So we'll have to, frankly, quadruple or make it 5x, 6x in terms of our R&D spend going forward if we really want to be a strong economy. And today, geopolitics also is becoming, quite a tenuous situation. You're seeing wars happening everywhere. Fortunately, we are a big, strong country, and we need to become bigger and stronger as we go forward. And to do that, we will need to be very strong at manufacturing. We'll need to be very self-dependent, not dependent on other countries. And for that, it's not just automation. We'll need a lot of innovation. So that's the message I'd really like to leave to this audience. Innovation, R&D is the future of our country. We don't invest in that, we have a big problem.
Dr. Sen, talk about our medium and small companies taking on from what Vishal said, right?
No, I completely agree with what Vishal said. Now, here's the question. There is a fundamental difference between R&D in the way we think about it and innovation. And there is a fundamental difference, to my mind at least, and that difference really gets reflected in the nature of the enterprise you're talking about. A small enterprise is not going to be R&D intensive. It cannot just afford the resources, but it can be very innovative. And indeed, the bulk of innovation comes from smaller entities, because they're up against much deeper pockets, and it is only through innovation that they really move forward. The point that DK made about we leapfrogging and moving to the digital infrastructure before we even got the physical infrastructure done is an important issue in this context. Because one of the things that digital infrastructure does is that it makes information so much more readily available than would have been otherwise. And innovation is really ultimately about a constant flow of information which changes the way we think. That's what innovation is. And the digital infrastructure permits that to happen. Now the question is that how do we, in a sense, make sure that this is getting across? The MSMEs have always been innovators, if not have been innovators, if not in the production side, but certainly on the way they organize themselves. And this innovation, and in fact the MSMEs drove a lot of things in our country. I mean, Naina was talking about skilling. The fact of the matter is bulk of skilling in India happened in MSMEs. Almost all the skills would work through essentially apprenticeship type arrangements. So the MSMEs have a critical role to play in all of this. And the question is that can we think of ways to make the MSMEs first make life easier for them and then encourage them to grow. So if you think about it, there's so much talk and so much is being done about startups. And when we think of startups, we think high-tech startups, which can then command huge valuations in a short period of time. But almost every MSME is a startup. The point is we just don't give them the same status. I mean, this is a problem on our side, it's not on theirs. But there is innovation there. Be sure. And that is an innovation that can be tapped into. It's innovation which feeds on itself, and through the digital infrastructure, it gets disseminated over the country. And so I think that's a huge resource that we must think about and actually make it easier for them to do what they can do.
Naina, do you have any ideas on how you could make MSMEs, or how India can make MSMEs more competitive? Also create more jobs in the process, right?
So again, having a healthy MSME base is critical. Countries like Germany have driven their industrialization and their model through a very rich MSME base, which by the way is hurting now. So let's see how they address that. But I think one of the areas which we are seeing the early stages of success in out of India, and I firmly believe in, is becoming the supply chains to the world. So you have OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, sitting around the world. We've seen that in the auto ancillary sector, where thanks to Maruti, a homegrown story, we've built what was a very healthy auto ancillary sector, feeding into the huge success of Maruti in the country at the time. But these auto ancillary players, the most successful of them, have become suppliers to the world now. And there is, I think, the point that one of you made, that it's not enough to just feed the Indian market. you become an exporter to the world. So if we can align into supply chains, we're seeing that now, for example, with companies like Walmart, who buy from India to supply the rest of the world. So it isn't each company trying to sell for itself. It's companies that are being leveraged, small companies, but belonging in these supply chains, which are already established through large companies, either supplying to them or because they are big buyers of products from here. So I think what happens with that is that you also get global best practice coming back here. So it's not just innovating for ourselves, but it's best innovations everywhere in the world, and our absorptive capacity to continue to innovate on the back of that. So there's that toing and froing. So it's exactly as Pranab says, it's not R&D, it's innovation at every level, learning from the best in the world, not just innovating for ourselves. So I think if we can drive the MSME sector to think global, ease that process, give them the linkages, digital really helps, because whether you're a small handicraft manufacturer sitting in a village in the northeast or a company belonging to the OEM chain, you're now being able to access markets, and buyers abroad are able to access what you're doing because you're able to showcase it. They're able to get in touch with you. I think connecting of these dots is going to be very important for us in terms of driving the MSME story. But the MSMEs themselves, in terms of energy efficiency, water efficiency, being able to, HR practices, they will be audited for every one of these. So the global practices we have will also have to be absorbed if we want to be suppliers to the world.
It comes back to what Jagbir had said, told us about the ease of doing business. It applies not just to the alcobev industry, but to all industries, including MSMEs. Vishal, you had a point.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple of quick comments on the MSME piece. See, MSMEs face three challenges primarily. Capital, getting the financing for their business, for working capital, as well as setting up their operations. And I'm talking manufacturing here, not services, because that's much less capital intensive. Second is access to markets. They have a good idea, they think of a good product. It may be a me too, but it could be a me too plus, which means they're copying something from somebody, but are making it a bit better. So there's some differentiation there. So they can sell and compete. But they need access to markets. And third is management capability. A lot of very good, smart entrepreneurs go out of business because they're not able to run their operations well enough. They may be very good on the manufacturing side, they're not good on the sales and marketing side. And they don't have the capability to go and hire people. These are the three that we actually need to solve eventually. If you look at the first one, I think that's getting solved to a very good extent today. Yeah, the fintech sector, that explosion, people can get loans. Our own company, Godrej Capital now, a B2B loan is available in 24 hours online. You don't even need to visit a branch. So that's getting solved to a certain extent. Access to markets. So Japan has this organization called JETRO, which actually helps the small sector out there internationally, organizing seminars like this, helping connections with industries, etc., etc. We are doing some of that. We can probably do much more. So that can solve access to markets. Management capability, I think, is something which we really need to figure out how to solve. Because the MSME sector is spread across the country. There are hundreds of thousands of them. How can we reach them and teach them how to really run their businesses much better? So I just wanted to add that.
The question is, who will teach them? Who does that?
I think that's a great question. From my side, as somebody running a large company, I can tell you we would be very happy to partner there. Pro bono, yeah? Somebody tells me there are 10 entrepreneurs who need help.
Can you do that with your suppliers?
Oh, we absolutely do that today.
Okay.
We do that today.
You have to.
And I think I think the big players need to handhold the small players, yeah? Because MSMEs are part of the ecosystem. They are not independently doing something. A vast majority of them are actually suppliers to big manufacturing. Right. That's how the ecosystem works. So I think it's big manufacturing's responsibility to actually handhold them and bring them up, because it helps us.
Right.
I develop my suppliers and make them more efficient. You know what? I'm probably going to get lower costs and better supply situations.
Jagbir, you also deal with a lot of suppliers, right? How do you transfer some of these best practices to your smaller vendors? So their management capability also comes at.
So not just suppliers, Gautam, what we've done now is what we call a good craft company. We've set up an incubation center in Goa, where not only are we innovating for the new age consumer, but we've also opened this facility, like what Vishal said, to anybody who wants to come and experiment over there. So, people are coming and distilling new gins, they're distilling new rums over there, and we're providing them the infrastructure. Obviously, in terms of suppliers, as any, because Diageo invested about $3.5 billion about 10 years ago, so we've really improved the quality and the delivery of our suppliers as well. And another thing that I would like to add is that we need to also open up our borders. So if I were to talk about alcohol, today we are in negotiations on an FTA with the UK. Now, when you would get in scotches at a lower custom duty, currently it's at 150%, but if, let's say, if it comes down, which the government of India is contemplating and negotiating on various other matters, it's not only going to get people cheaper scotch. We must remember that a lot of scotch is blended into the Indian whiskies that we made. A large amount of whiskey is exported out of India, not just single malts, but what we call the IMFL, the Indian-made foreign liquors as well. The quality of those whiskies will also improve.
Got it.
So when you're importing, it's not just that you're getting in for the Indian consumer here, it's also adding to your export quality.
Got it.
Yeah. Thanks.
Mr. Joshi, on the exports part, right? What are some of the new challenges that you see India facing that probably China didn't in the last 20 years back? Decarbonization, possibly. You have to decarbonize as you also sort of export into Europe, for instance.
Well, I think every decade or every 2 decades, something new comes up. And I think now it's coming up at a faster pace. So you have geopolitics, which is completely changing. When China was growing, when East Asia was growing, countries were opening up. They were trading more with each other. Tariff walls were coming down. Now you have a system where I think countries have their own industrial policies. They want to promote their domestic production. And at the same time, tariff walls are being erected. So that is swimming against the tide in that.
Everybody is a first policy, America first too.
Yeah. And then I think the decarbonization story is more interesting because none of these countries had to worry about dirtying the environment while they were growing. So we are in a phase where we need to grow faster. So, and you need to adapt to climate change, and at the same time, you need to mitigate the climate risks. Mitigation is a long-term goal, 2070. But adaptation, I think just to give you quick examples, I think apart from the heat wave that we faced, CRISIL did some work and found that for the microfinance companies, the collection of the dues became more difficult because the collection agents couldn't travel that much in the heat. And the people of whom the money is collected are also at the lower end of the stream. So they also can't work out during extreme heat. So this is one example of that. Second example is the food inflation that we are seeing is partly because of climate, because heat waves and changing pattern of monsoon is impacting food production. And what that means is that the central bank cannot cut rates till the time there is a durable reduction in food inflation. And food inflation is the most volatile, the most idiosyncratic part of the inflation. So now I think it's making monetary policy more difficult. So I think these are just 2 examples. There are several of them where climate is playing out in subtle ways. And once we try to mitigate it, there are other risks that are going to emerge.
Right. Naina, let me come to services again, right? Of course, we have seen information technology, the IT industry, which is still probably the biggest part of India's export story when it comes to services. You spoke about tourism, right? But what next for services? You stressed on the fact that it is services that will take India closer to that goal that we have been speaking about. Of course, manufacturing is there. But what next in services? Because the point is, services has an advantage, right? An inherent advantage in the fact that geopolitics doesn't probably impact services exposed as much as merchandise.
Well, geopolitics does impact services. Everybody's bothered about jobs, and immigration's become such a big issue. So I fear that that will also get impacted. But so far, India's had a very good story to tell. And beyond IT, I mentioned medical services, home care, nurses. I mean, that whole pocket would be interesting. But I want to come back to the whole area of having a healthy, hygienic population, for which services means we have to clean, we have to ensure that the infrastructure we put in. So we've spent a lot, in fact, in building toilets. Over 2.5 million people got jobs, another 5.5 million got indirect employment. But we could provide 10 million people with jobs now in the O&M, the operating and management of the facilities, where banks of toilet now remain locked, not just because of lack of water, but also because there's no one or no budget there to maintain them. And I think if we are to look at skilling and services, it would be the entrepreneurs we create in plastic waste management, for example. The folks that can charge for the service of collecting plastic, treating it, and selling it. Those that would be there to run a bank of toilets for a profit. So these models of delivery of social services, where our infrastructure return on capital is falling rapidly because we are not maintaining the infrastructure, we're not using the infrastructure, is where we could actually go a long way in terms of job creation and creation of MSMEs and entrepreneurs to run these facilities.
Absolutely. I think we are short on time, and it has been very interesting discussion. We covered all the three important segments: services, manufacturing, agriculture, in our discussion. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.